It says something about the state of the modern MCU that you can't ever predict precisely what you'll get going into the cinema, but you can be damn sure it will be one of at least a million flavors of bad. More likely, it will be at least a million of several billion flavors of bad. It's hard to say which aspect of the film does more damage to itself and everything around it, but let's kick off with the world building. I think it's probably an understatement to say that the world building in this film and in the broader MCU is now broken, to the point where the various new installments set in the same universe cannot actually inhabit the same universe, even when they're supposed to inhabit the same universe, because there is simply no way of linking the events in one installment with the events in another. The latest film now contradicts the events of the previous installment with quite alarming frequency, and though Kevin Feige's name ostensibly ties everything together, that is his place in the credits and in the company after all, well, there's no evidence he's actually been in the office for the last few years. Once upon a time, and as mentioned way back at the top, you could forgive a dud entry in the MCU, because though the whole of the individual film might be garbage, certain particulars were redeemable and even useful. Even Captain Marvel attained the level of useful viewing, even as that usefulness was regrettable. Captain Marvel was necessary viewing because it would, clearly even at the time, impact the plot of Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Endgame proceeded as the next chapter without overwriting anything substantial in that predecessor. We can and should regret that that's what happened because Captain Marvel is garbage, but that it did is not in question. Prior to that, no MCU film I can think of failed on every single constituent part of filmmaking. If the characters were naff, plot and world building were at least developed. If the individual plots sucked, world building and character progressed. If the world building was fumbled, here's looking at you, Wakanda, then plot and character still amounted to something. It's a tired point, but it is worth repeating it.
Are you yawning in the middle of this while I'm breaking it down? Huh?
All of this was so because the Infinity Saga was an ever-present and compelling link between each individual installment of phases 1 to 3. The MCU might have stumbled every now and then, but it still walked the same path, it still had a destination in sight. Much of this rested on the meta-world line. The universe part of the MCU expanded dramatically from phase 1 onwards, but it never lost its ties to the local, the familiar, and the understandable. Every grand cosmic event had consequences for our one recognizable world. Thor was firmly grounded on Earth before questions about Asgard really arose. Star-Lord could hop around in the galaxy, but he was human with human wants, tastes, behaviors, and a human history. We never see Thanos wiping out half of all life in the universe, we see him snap away half the people on Earth, with whom we're pretty much all familiar. And Endgame picks up showing the consequences, largely through Earth-based world building and environmental storytelling. The empty streets, the lingering sense of shock, the therapy groups, the memorials, the social strife, the abandoned houses and the unkempt streets, the world in mourning. Endgame has significant flaws, but the world it presents us is largely contiguous with the world preceding it. The MCU's multiverse arc from phase 4 onwards might not necessarily have failed to establish an equivalent grounding, but the question of necessity is now an academic one. It has failed to establish an equivalent grounding. We don't know where we are, who we're with, what the stakes or the consequences are.
You know, let's talk about these past 3 years from a Marvel perspective. When I was on this stage in 2019, we introduced Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And believe it or not, almost everything we announced that day has come to fruition, and you've all met characters like Shang-Chi. You've all met amazing new characters like the Eternals, like Yelena Belova, and the Red Guardian, and Agatha Harkness came into the MCU. You met Miss Minutes, who kicked off our entire program today. Kate Bishop, Maya Lopez, Kamala Khan, and even a brand new Captain America in Sam Wilson. And since we were here 3 years ago, we added a few more things to Phase 4 that you know about, of course, a movie called Spider-Man No Way Home, and a show called Moon Knight, and of course Ms. Marvel, and now, believe it or not, we are approaching the end of Phase 4 when She-Hulk Attorney at Law comes out, and this November, Phase 4 comes to a close with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
Get ready for Must Shit TV, starting now 4 straight hours of pure shit.
We have absolutely no sense of where an individual entry across phase 4 or 5 might be leading.
But what's fun to do here is to talk a little bit about the future. And to talk a little about, and you may be saying, well, if Black Panther is the end of phase 4, what in the heck is Phase 5?
Very good question.
There is no single thread for the story to dance along. There is no center of gravity around which it can orbit. Each entry creates, fittingly, a brand new branch on the world line.
So I thought we'd spend a few minutes going through what we have in store. You know that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania kicks off Phase 5 on February 17th.
I wouldn't brag too much about that thing, big guy.
We've got, coming to Disney Plus, Secret Invasion.
God, it's all so depressing.
It is an honor to say that finally Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 comes out in May.
Well, okay.
We are shooting right now our new series for Disney Plus, Echo.
Stop it.
And I can't wait for you to meet all of her characters. We're in production on The Marvels,
And how's that going for you?
the sequel to Captain Marvel 2. Loki Season 2 is shooting right now.
Don't you wish it wasn't?
The film that we announced at the end of our last panel, Blade, starring Mahershala Ali, comes out November 3rd, and we start filming this October.
How's it going?
It's not going well.
Our series Ironheart is a part of Phase 5, shooting right now.
You cannot be serious.
We've already talked about Catherine Hahn, amazing, returning in her own series, Agatha, Coven of Chaos.
Who?
And I am very happy to confirm that Sam Wilson will be appearing in the next Captain America film, which is called Captain America: New World Order. And rounding out Phase 5, we have a series on Disney Plus. This is very special. It is going to be an 18-episode first season, 18 episodes. Daredevil: Born Again.
I can't follow this shitty storyline at all.
And this all but guarantees that individual films lose that tripartite mechanical shield I just described. It's no longer the case that any Phase 4, 5, or probably even 6 film will be worth seeing for its contributions to one or more of plot, character, and world building, because each and every one of them could quite literally be taking place in a different universe entirely. You could, if you were willing to stretch farther than Mr. Fantastic, say that Multiverse of Madness at least offered something on a world building level. It does, after all, drive home the point that the multiverse is going to be the thing going forward. It goes down as the origin of whatever story the MCU is now trying to tell. And so for all the film is a poisonous turd, you can say where it sits in the overarching narrative. It sits at the beginning. It failed on character and plot, but there's a little bit of useful information on the world building level, just about, at a push, if you really, really work hard to find it. The problem is that world building kind of entails that you build a world, and absolutely nothing since has accomplished this. Without a coherent story above the individual entries, absolutely nothing you set up is worth anything. Multiverse of Madness was a bad film that had to be, and probably could have been, salvaged by what came after it. Yet what came after it was bomb after bomb after bomb. We could have sent Doctor Strange off into the multiverse and spent the rest of the phase rebuilding locally, ensuring that Doctor Strange's return in any future film was the moment the wall between the known and the unknown began to collapse. In such a story, the multiverse would be the other, the out there threat, in much the same way dramatically Loki and his alien armies in Avengers introduced us to the vast external world. But we'd have begun from a position of familiarity and a solid grounding. That is not, though, what we've got. Multiverse of Madness needed to be redeemed by whatever came after it, yet everything that's come after it has compounded its worst qualities. Ant-Man 3 marks the cinematic debut of Kang, but Kang cannot tie the multiverse together because there are infinite Kangs in infinite universes, and it's by no means sure that Jonathan Majors will be playing any of them in the future. Jonathan Majors himself is a more menacing villain than Kang the Conqueror, allegedly. Rumors that the MCU might be moving away from Kang altogether, and the fact that pretty much none of the films currently on the slate necessarily require his presence, rather confirm the point. We're not in a multiverse saga, we're in limbo, waiting for a saga to start. We have multiple universes, we have no saga. We have infinite places and people, we have no story to tie them together. This being the case, we're now in the position where the worst MCU films cannot fall back on necessity. It's now possible for them to add absolutely nothing to the universe of which they are a part. Thor: Love and Thunder came very close to doing this, but the Marvels is, I would argue, the first that definitively adds nothing. Because what's actually changed? What about the fictional world has been altered by the Marvels? What do you need to know from it? I'm struggling to name a single constituent part of the film that in any way impacts anything around it. After all, the resolution of the film proper took care to tell us that nothing has actually changed. The damage done to each of the 4 planets was repaired. Nobody we know dies. No relationships essentially change. The Kree Empire might be gone, but that happened before this film and apparently nobody noticed. Rambo confirms the X-Men are on their way, but we already knew that, so yeah, what's changed? I'd say arcs were resolved within the film, but actually, I'm not sure anything in the film can be called an arc. We got 90-ish minutes of entirely redundant filler predicated on a tiny flashback to Carol Danvers doing what she said she'd do at the close of Captain Marvel, taking the fight to the Supreme Intelligence on Hala. Yet none of this can have any impact on anything because it's resolved within the film. The world state at the close of the Marvels is really no different than the world state at the beginning of the Marvels. So what's the damn point? Ignoring the multiversal side of world building and keeping things to one dimension in space-time, the Marvels is an absolute mess of a film on a world-building level. Across 2 short flashback sequences, we managed to make the place of both the Skrull and the Kree untenable and unknown respectively. In 2019, the Skrull aimed to leave the galaxy with Captain Marvel's aid to found a planet safe from Kree expansion. By the time of Secret Invasion, they'd returned because they were pissed off at Nick Fury's failure to help them find the planet Captain Marvel said that she would help them find. In the Marvels, she simultaneously abandoned them instantly way back in 1995 to go and blow up the Supreme Intelligence, while also finding them a refugee planet on which to establish a commune which is located within the boundaries of the Kree Empire they were supposed to be fleeing. These are 3 entirely separate threads of world building and story that cannot exist alongside each other. The resolution to the Skrull arc in the Marvels has them return to Earth for safety, even though the 2019 film said they couldn't stay on Earth because they wouldn't be safe, and even though Secret Invasion closes with the passage of an anti-alien law that classes all aliens as hostile entities, meaning Earth is definitionally not safe for the Skrull. They are taken to New Asgard by Valkyrie because Valkyrie is close friends with Carol, even though they've never met and they have no relationship. We have no idea, and I doubt we'll ever see, what the residents of New Asgard might think of a sudden influx of Skrull refugees. And we have no idea how New Asgard itself stands in relation to the Anti-Alien Act, since the letter of the law should render New Asgard itself a hostile alien faction embedded on Earth. The Kree Empire, meanwhile, is gone. At some point, off-screen, there was a massive civil war that tore the Empire apart and destroyed its central planet because Carol wiped out the Supreme Intelligence. We have probably much less than 30 seconds of flashback to tell us that heretics of some description arose, which we assume played some part in this civil war, and the outcome is a dying Hela led by some random called Darth Bender. Who is she? Why is she? Why did she rise to power over anybody else? Where did she come from? No idea. The Kree Empire has supposedly collapsed, and yet she proceeds for much of the film as though it hasn't, offering to reintegrate the Skrull into said empire in one moment and demanding the Waterworld people atone for their crimes against that empire in another. Are the Waterworld people part of the Kree Empire? Were they ever part of the Kree Empire? What's the history there? Again, no idea. The collapse of the Kree Empire is the collapse of one of the largest, if loosely defined, entities in the MCU's galaxy-spanning narrative, and yet its destruction is told in a few seconds of flashback exposition, and we have absolutely no sense what this means for the galaxy as a whole. You'd think such a notable event in galactic history might have at least warranted a mention in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, or any MCU film which has anything to do with the rest of the galaxy set between 1995 and the present, but apparently nobody noticed the Kree Empire had collapsed into civil war and anarchy. Fair enough. We learned that the jump point system was created by bangles that were previously magic nor dimension things, per Ms. Marvel, but that are now quantum bands that the Kree at least knew about, yet never bothered trying to find. What's the link between the Noor dimension, quantum bullshit, and jump points? Who or what are the clandestines? Why did they build the jump points? How did the Kree ever become aware of such artifacts? And why was nobody else aware of them? Why were they ever split up? Why were they buried apart from each other? How did one of them end up getting mailed from Pakistan to New Jersey? What's the point of any of this? We get confirmation that the jump points span the entire universe, but that only really serves to make the events of Captain Marvel redundant because it means that the Skrull couldn't flee the galaxy to escape the Kree. Of the rest of the questions, the answer is, dunno. This film cannot exist in the same universe as Secret Invasion, it can't be set after it for numerous reasons already stated, and a few I haven't yet mentioned. Fury's wife doesn't exist in the Marvels, for example. Also, nobody gave a shit that Maria Hill is dead, Talos is never mentioned despite the fact that he was the leader of the Skrull who were on Earth, but it can't be set before it either because there's no mention of the Skrull being in New Asgard, for example. Moving on to other elements, what on Earth is Saber, or rather what in space is Saber? What does it do, practically speaking? Why does it exist? It has a space station in orbit that seemingly serves no other function than keeping Nick Fury in storage. Unlike S.H.I.E.L.D., we have no sense of its integration with terrestrial authorities, largely because we've had no interaction between it and terrestrial authorities, because so much of the post-Endgame MCU thinks Earth is too boring to bother with. Unlike Avengers, which even way back when showed the tension between Nick Fury's S.H.I.E.L.D. and the various world governments born of the fact that they had conflicting goals and agency, Earth seems entirely unaware of anything going up on the Saber space station, and no government has anything at all to say about the fact that they almost lost their fucking sun. Even basic timeline stuff has ceased to cohere, or at least it's become muddled with retroactive changes. Where in relation to Endgame are the flashbacks set, for example? We've already ditched the original excuse for Carol not coming back in favor of, I didn't want to come back a failure, and yet the flashback showed she did come back during the blip, which would have to be after she destroyed Haller, because Darth Bender's flashback confirms that took place 30 years ago, meaning that Carol did come back to Earth a failure, and then she left. And then she came back again for Endgame, and in the intervening time she, floated aimlessly around in space, waiting for a sequel that never came. Writers who cannot get a grip on the foundational elements of one universe should absolutely not be given the license to take on an infinite number of universes. The larger your property, the more difficult it becomes to keep so many plates spinning at once, but it's far from impossible, it's just difficult. That so much of the Marvels relies on parts of the MCU remaining in stasis for 30 years, while others contradict established canon, while still more decide to fast forward known and important parts of the galaxy to extinction, is a fault born of a lack of focus. Yes, the galaxy is large, but one of the important points of storytelling is to contract the vast into a manageable narrative. Phases 1 through 3 manage this, Phases 4 through 6 have had a crisis. The mid-credit scene sums up this problem as well. We've ramped up the pace and we've vastly expanded the scope, and yet we have absolutely no idea where we're going. We have no idea what world we're in, or how its constituent parts interact, never mind how they interact with any one of an infinite number of alternative timelines, in just one of which maybe there's a world where the MCU doesn't resemble a flirkin that's exploded into spaghetti. The post-credit scene teases the formation of a team of unrelated non-entities to face a threat that doesn't exist in an undefinable multiverse. Unlike the Avengers, formed by a man with a plan, this new team doesn't have a clue who it will be formed of, or why it should exist, or what it's trying to accomplish, or how, or indeed why. This germinal Young Avengers exists because Disney demands more content, not because there's a story laid out that actually requires its presence. The Marvel's approach to world building, which is really just a concentrated version of the broader MCU approach, goes thusly. Where there is union, let me bring discord. Where there is truth, let me bring error. Where there is faith, let me bring doubt. Where there is hope, let me bring despair.